Now, let's talk about blocking, because point of origin, and by the way, point of origin is for close range. It is for when you're within contact, maybe slightly with outside of contact, but close enough that telegraphing now becomes an issue. You no longer can change once you're committed. I hope that makes sense. If you're 10 feet away, it doesn't matter where my hand is at. By the time I get closer to you, I can change my hand position, right? Point of origin is an issue when you're in close, not when you're far away, when you're in close. Right? So let's talk about blocking. Right? Obviously, the whole point with using point of origin with your block is so that way your block is faster. Now, look at these examples right here. Right? They really lend themselves to understanding point of origin, because these blocks don't look like some of our regular blocks. Look at right here. Blocking across, and just by rotating the arm, which is already hanging down in the front, right? Very small motion on your part. Notice how the body complements that and actually speeds the whole thing up. So the body does 50% of this, maybe. The hand does 50% of this, but they're doing it simultaneously. So you cut your time to do it in half, because the body is responsible for creating some of that motion and some of that travel. Right? If you look at right here, with the uppercut coming from towards your ribs, coming from the side, it's so easy to just rotate your elbow outward and have a very forceful block that's moving right from point of origin. The block is fast because it's using point of origin. And now if you look at this technique right here against the kick, with your arms already chambered, now you don't have to use a circle here. You don't have to use what's called a double factor. You can go right down, bam, right from where you're at to the target, because of point of origin. See, usually that would not be the case in a kicking technique. Usually, when you start with your feet together, hands on your side, your blocking arm now has to circle. You have to first bring it into position and circle it around your opponent's kicking leg. That might not make it in time. That's why we use a double factor. The whole reason for having a double factor is to put point of origin back in the block, because you were missing it a moment ago. If I step back and just circle my right arm, that's not point of origin. That's probably too slow. We use a double factor because our opposite arm is poised for point of origin. The right arm is not, the left arm is. Because my left arm, all it has to do from hanging by the side of the body is torque, palm up, which by moving your upper arm and your elbow can be so quick. And of course you close your fist at the time. It is a very rapid motion. And by the way, we're going to be talking about opposites and reverses a lot. You might notice that this is the exact reverse motion of what we did a moment ago on the other block. Right? One torques palm up, one torques palm down. Right? It's just reversing the motion of the previous block that was a good point of origin block. But by putting this double factor in, I now get my point of origin back. So if I started with the hands on the side, hands hanging down, yes, I do need the double factor. The first arm, the left arm in this case, provides us the point of origin and makes sure that we're fast enough. But it cannot complete the block by itself, because it's your rear arm. It doesn't have enough range to fully protect you. So you do need your front arm, which is coming in right afterwards, to then complete the block. So these two, they have to work together. And the reason why you can't do it just with one arm is because you wouldn't be using point of origin, and probably you would not make it in time. You probably would get kicked. Now here in this scenario, it's different, because you had your guard up. Once you have your guard up and a kick comes right at you, there is no reason to use a double factor. Why? Your arm can now immediately drop from this point of origin, bam, right down to that leg, the target that you're striking. So you're not just blocking, you're striking a target. And it's a good idea in Kenpo. We're going to talk about that more later when it comes to talking about zone theories. It's better to think of your opponent's depth zones rather than thinking, oh, there is his kick and there is the target. Because the kick is a target. The leg is the first thing he gives us. If somebody comes at me and is kicking me, at that moment, the first thing in the depth zones is his foot. Then his shin, then his knee, then his thigh, then his body, and so on, right? So you want to attack these first depth zones, because that's what you got. That's what the opponent is giving you. And that's another important thing to understand about Kenpo. We attack the first depth zones. We don't fixate on a target, because that target won't always be available. When a certain target is not available, another target is. So when you're fixated on just one target, you're often going to miss other available targets. But if you're thinking in terms of depth zones, you simply monitor which zones are available and which ones are not. And again, we're going to talk about that more later. Point is, point of origin determines our blocks. One more example right here, with your arms being up higher than your opponent, and your opponent does a low two-hand push. Now, this block coming down like so makes perfect sense. But if you started with your hands on the side, like we often do in class when we are first being taught this technique, you have to understand, when you're first learning it in its embryonic, or in its basic shape, you're violating point of origin. If you have to circle around your opponent's arms to then come on top of them, you're not going to make that on time if your opponent is fast. You're violating point of origin. This block right here, with both arms coming down on top of your opponent's arms, is meant to be used in situations where your arms happen to be higher than your opponent's two-hand push. Then you just drop down because of point of origin. If your arms are not higher, don't use this. You're probably not going to make it in time. Okay? I hope this all makes sense, guys. Now, is that all there's to it? Is that all there's to point of origin? No. We haven't even talked about strikes yet, right? Because when it comes to strikes, the whole subject of point of origin is now going to become vastly more complex. But it's really not that difficult to understand still. Right? Most students are aware of the concept of point of origin on their first strike. Often, Kenpo students learn this when they learn how to strike from the hand hanging down position. We have some techniques where the arm is hanging down on the side, and you are learning how to use that arm, your right arm that's hanging down at the side, how to use it right from that position. With, for example, a reverse handsword to the groin, or a forearm strike to the abdominal section, or maybe even a reverse handsword to the side of the neck. Even though this group of techniques is also often used to explain family grouping, it also demonstrates point of origin. Okay? Now that's what most people are aware of. Okay, my first strike I can get in there much faster because I'm not first bringing my arm back, I'm punching right from where I'm at. I'm striking right from where I'm at. Okay? But what a lot of people don't realize is that, well, every time you execute a strike, you now have a new point of origin. In other words, if I execute a back knuckle, and I do not retract it before selecting my next action, but I want to go right into another strike, well, I could very easily, instead of retracting my back knuckle, I can let it become a heel palm claw, for example. Right? I can go bang, bang, right? Well, I have to make sure my bone structure and my upper arm is aligned properly for that, because in order for me to have a heel palm claw that has any merit and any effect, I can't just leave my upper arm the way it is and just use my hand, right? That would have no power. As a matter of fact, it would make me vulnerable. Right? But if I instead understand the purpose of my upper arm properly and the alignment of my arm, and I turn this into that, right, and I'm able to now forcefully go from one strike to the next, you see how I can flow from one strike to another strike in a sequence, right? And how one action flows into the next. That's what we call this, a sequential flow of action. And I use, in this case, I guess you could say I use reverse motion, because the claw is striking on the way back, right? So you can see how this is much more economical. I did not have to reset between those two strikes. So point of origin, when you execute it in series, in a sequence, you now have the effect of taking the lag time between strikes and shortening that lag time. In other words, you can strike more often in less time. Right? So what a lot of people don't realize is that point of origin gets used constantly, and you reuse it, you could say, again and again and again and again and again. the end of every strike is the point of origin for your next strike. Okay? So let's look at a practical example of this. Here's a technique that almost everybody knows in Kenpo, is against the left hair grab. Right? So you're pinning with your left hand, and you're executing a right middle knuckle fist to your opponent's armpit or lymph nodes in the armpit with your right hand. Now, first of all, how do you do a middle knuckle fist, by the way? I don't know if you can see that, but make sure that your first finger presses against the knuckle, the second digit knuckle of your ring finger. Right there, can you see it? I hope you can see that in the camera. Then you close it all up, right? So it's not with the first finger bent completely. The first finger is straight right here, and it locks against, can you see it? Can you see it? Can you see it? It locks against the ring finger, and it's pushed with your thumb portion right here against the ring finger right here. So you can squeeze these two fingers together, and you can prevent, there it is, you can prevent the middle knuckle from being collapsed downward, because there is no way to go for it. And this is what Mr. Parker showed us actually in the 1989 instructors camp at Barbara Hill's school in Ventura. Right? He went around and showed all of us this. He wanted to make sure that people understood how to make a proper middle knuckle fist in Kenpo. Right? So anyhow, let's look at the situation right here. Pinning with your left, executing the middle knuckle fist with your right. Why? Well, you need to pin. If you don't pin, your opponent can control you. You need to control your opponent. He's giving you his hand. Don't allow him to have options with his hand. Pin